All right. So thank you very much for being here. Welcome to our afternoon session. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Carlos Rico and Tatiana Mesa Hoyos from Universidad Javeriana. They will be our presenters this afternoon. The title of their presentation is The Nonsense of Interculturality in the Educational Policies in Colombia. What sort of inclusion are we talking about? So our presenters, first of all, I'm going to tell you about Carlos. Again, he's from Universidad Pontificia Universidad Javeriana. His research interests are applied linguistics, language methodology and evaluation, language materials, language competences, and interculturality. And Tatiana Mesa Hoyos from Pontificia Universidad Javeriana too. Her research interests are English as a foreign language, or EFL, interculturality, narratives, and cognition. So please, let's welcome our two presenters, Carlos and Tatiana. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mario. First of all, we start projecting. We would like to thank you for attending our presentation. Quite amazing and important topics have been raised in the plenary and in the sessions these 2 days. We're excited to be here next to authors that we have cited in our research, which is an honor to be here with. And we also want to thank the IALIC committee for giving us this space. It's an honor to be here for both of us. Thank you. This is Tatiana Mesa Hoyos speaking, and my partner Carlos will follow. So, the nonsense of interculturality in educational policies in Colombia. What sort of inclusion are we talking about? Woohoo, quite a broad topic. I will start telling you a bit of how we started doing research on ICC together and how this concept has evolved through it. Later, Carlos will go over a broader perspective of interculturality from a Latin American vision, and both of us will be giving our final insights at the end. Now, before referring to interculturality, we would like to give you some context of our country, Colombia. In many countries in Latin America, as Colombia, governments are making great efforts for people to learn English so that they can improve their economies and adapt to worldwide growth, which is one of the main reasons the Colombian government has implemented the National English Program here for monetary reasons, so that people can make a living or have more working opportunities. Although there have been improvements since these policies were first implemented, there are still many difficulties with implementing bilingualism programs. For instance, these bilingualism programs or the National English Program are or is founded on the Common European Framework of Reference, but each population's real social, cultural, and economic conditions have not been taken in consideration. Therefore, learning English has become a nightmare. Previous one before. Please, Carlos. A must. Learning English has become a nightmare, a must, a challenge for many Colombians as they lack the ideal conditions to do so. Maybe there's a lack of time to include English in the institution's curricula, or lack of quality material or material itself, even a lack of proficient teachers, or maybe there's a great number of students per class. Another reality is that they don't even have the possibility of obtaining authentic opportunities to practice the language, and therefore motivation is often missing. Now, the reason why the learning of English has become such a challenge for most Colombian students is because a large part of our country's population is rural. That's more than 30%, according to the United Nations report on human development in 2016. And an even greater number live in poor conditions. 30% of the urban population and 65% of the rural population is classified as poor in Colombia. Besides, here we have the Human Development Index, which is used by the United Nations to measure 3 key dimensions of human development per country: life expectancy, access to education, and the standard of living. Although there are many debates on whether to use this index to talk about the reality that countries live, it shows in red, this map shows in red the areas of our country living with the best conditions, and in yellow, the worst ones. Notice this is an adjusted and updated version of the report in 2016. This is to explain that in 2020, in a new measure from 90.9% of the population in rural areas, 42.9% is poor and 48% are vulnerable. While in cities, out of 67.7% of the population, 42.4 are poor and 25.3 are vulnerable. If you're following the numbers, then you have noticed that there was a decrease on poverty in the last 2 years in rural areas. I will get back to that later. Now, what's the difference between poverty and vulnerability in these measurements? According to the World Bank, vulnerability means that while individuals are not currently in poverty, they recognize that they are vulnerable to events like a bad harvest, unemployment, illness, an unexpected expense, an economic downturn that could easily push them into poverty. On the other hand, most operational measures define poverty as the shortfall of current income or consumption expenditures from a poverty line, which means there is a lack of access to education, health, infrastructure, housing, employment, and so on. Important to highlight that these operational measures measure poverty only at a single point in time and not through time. In this same line of thought, this graph shows the dynamics of social classes in rural areas in Colombia in the last years. As you can see, most of the rural population is either poor or lives in vulnerable conditions. The green line on the top in the graph refers to the poor population, and the yellow one for vulnerability, which is where most of the population concentrates. It is there to point out that vulnerability in cities has been decreasing, while in rural areas it is increasing. Also, it is possible to see a slight increase in the rural middle class between 2016 and 2020, which is the blue line in the graph. And this is one of the biggest concerns, as by 2020, only 8.8% of the rural population was in the middle class. So according to the United Nations report, this shows that in rural areas, there are less incentives to belong to the middle class, which is crucial for social mobility, capital accumulation, and economic dynamism. Consequently, efforts on reducing inequality are to be focused on increasing the amount of people in the middle class to reduce poverty and vulnerability. This reduction of poverty from 2019 to 2020 can be explained by the subsidies the government especially gave to the rural population during the pandemic, which made it easier for this population to achieve the total income, which will up them out of poverty. And that is earning over no more than $50 a month. Therefore, in the near future, this requires the government to continue reinforcing their social policies for rural areas, as they cannot rely on government subsidies to make up the lack of earning of the population. This cannot be done, as this will weaken their working structure, while investing more in the development of rural areas could help to achieve a long-term reduction of poverty. We couldn't finish this contextualization without mentioning the great gap there is among internet access among rural and urban areas in our different regions. In the Caribbean and the Pacific region, access to the internet is 4 times higher in urban areas than in rural ones. However, if we see the urban area of the Caribbean and the Pacific region, they do not even reach 50% coverage. Actually, Bogotá, our capital region, our capital city, doesn't even reach 80% coverage, except for Valle del Cauca, which we will refer to later. So people who live in rural areas may not even have the chance to go to the cinema in their hometowns or know about the latest global trends. In some cases, they cannot even conceive themselves being beyond the region's capital city. This reminds me of an anecdote. I will never forget in Tisol, Colombia, 2 years ago, when after our interculturality presentation, a teacher came up to me and told me how grateful she was to hear about interculturality. And she started, well, you know, in many English books and classes, it is common to teach students as part of the vocabulary, that collocation, going to the cinema. And she continued, but from where I am from, Valle del Cauca, in the southwest of our country, specifically from Santander de Quilichao, a remote town in Colombia, which people know of just because it is located in the sugar cane region of the country. The kids who go to school there are the children of the cane cutters. And she told me, can you believe it? We have to teach them to go to the cinema, and they don't understand what's the excitement about it or why it is that they have to go to the closest capital cities to go to the movies when they just want to become sugarcane cutters or help out in the sugarcane industry as their parents have always done. So how can you teach English to this type of population and keep people motivated beyond their social, economic, and even personal issues? Therefore, the English teacher has had to acquire the knowledge, attitude, values, and communication skills to enable these students to successfully learn English without them feeling they are learning something that does not relate to them. This is very common in our classes, where we receive students from all over the country, students who want to become language teachers. Therefore, this is the reality that we prepare our future language teachers to face. Based on this context, we started doing research to identify what were the teaching strategies English teachers were using to develop intercultural communicative competence in students studying a BA in modern languages. In terms of the materials and activities they were using to promote interculturality and how they were evaluating it, or if they actually were evaluating it. Now, regarding interculturality, it is well known that the intercultural approach has been included in foreign language syllabi. So at the university we work for in Bogotá, in our BA in modern languages, we had already implemented these changes in the majors syllabi in order to we were concerned about how teachers were actually carrying out the development of ICC in their everyday practice, and also how they were understanding ICC itself in their English courses at the BA in modern languages. Actually, at that point, there were little research studies that would guide teachers on how to include ICC. So we reviewed the state of the art of ICC, what it meant, and how we could include this in our English classes. Before I continue, can we go one slide back, please? Before I continue, I don't want you to look at the multidimensional poverty index, which is the most reliable of all the measurements of poverty. The bluer, the poorer, and the whiter, the richer in 2020. Notice that the poorest regions are the Orinoco, which borders Venezuela, and also our coasts, our Atlantic coast, the Pacific coast, as well as the Amazon region. So this brings us to the following question. What's interculturality? Through research and analysis, we discovered that ICC is much more than putting yourself in someone else's shoes or communicating in an effective and appropriate way with others who are different to you. It is the way communities are prepared to deal with new forms of cultural exchange, and more specifically, how we could negotiate divergence and diversity in a context where the interlocutors carry different social identities. It's a way of being able to deal effectively and adequately with diversity, whether ethnic, racial, religious, or cultural, or as Fantini said, the capacity to deal with differences in a positive way, which implies a person's ability to communicate and interact despite cultural barriers. We will go over these definitions later on from a Latin American perspective. So we started with this definition of ICC in our project. The individual needs of a population to get to know themselves and discover a complexity that must be embraced in order to understand it in others and to be able to experience more comprehensive interaction. We decided to start with this contextualization of Colombia in this presentation, as we would like you to visualize the different regions that are in our country and understand the concept of culture in it. This is our country. It is made up of 8 different regions, including San Andres Island. We are bordered by both the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. We have a strategic geographical location considering that we border both oceans. This also allowed the entrance of many cultures to our country in colonial times. We used to have more than 80 native languages. Some historians say there were more than 100, and today we only have around 69 native languages and Spanish. 65 of those languages are indigenous and 4 are Afro. However, every single Colombian high school student must achieve a B1 level and a university student a B2 in their English proficiency in order to become bilingual. So at first, we went over the state of the art of ICC, which became a great part of our theoretical framework. We studied the approaches to ICC, the different ways culture was viewed from ICC, and we went through its main authors. From this perspective, some authors see culture through a simplistic or a complex approach. The simplistic one states that cultures are identified through countries or geographical barriers. However, through our study, we understand it from a more complex approach, which is that each large group is made up of smaller groups, even if they are in the same territory, like it happens in our country. We are one country with 9 different regions, and each one has its own culture, independent to the fact that we all are from the same country and speak the same language. We could even broaden this out to our whole Latin American region. From Spitzberg, 1988, who was already talking about knowledge and motivation and skills. Then Rubens, 1976, or actually before he came up with some traits or values of ICC. After that came Bennett from the US with his culture shock stages, ethnocentrism and ethno-relativism. Later came Byram from Europe, who gave more emphasis to interaction and values. He mentioned savoir-faire, savoir-s'engager, savoir. Followed by Vanderbloom in 2003 with his broader perspective on global ICC. Next, Fantini with his 5 dimensions, where he mentions proficiency in the host language, as well as Risager. And finally, Chen and Chaitza, and this theoretical framework, which was based on Humphrey 2007. Through all this research, we adopted Byram savoir to be able to assess the development of ICC in language classes through activities, materials, and assessment. Rico, 2012, my partner over here, proposed a new savoir to keep in mind, which we integrated. Savoir communiquer, or communicating, proficiency in communication, which is the ability to function linguistically, how learners relate to familiar or unfamiliar experiences through language. Think about how one perceives, conceptualizes, and expresses, and how to communicate with the possibilities that the other person has to understand. As a result to our research, we identified that we do not have different countries within short distances, but our regions, even within themselves, are diverse. And this started to reveal in our study. So we came up with this reloaded definition of ICC, which would imply the development of competences in various systems of perception, thought, behavior, in order to promote abilities such as accepting diversity of cultures and identities, interacting and communicating in effective, appropriate, and flexible ways, and obtaining cooperation. Therefore, seeing the language teacher as an intercultural agent, which means that English teachers become much more than linguistic mediators, they become intercultural agents. So the English class becomes a space to learn, discuss, and approach culture through language independent if it will make you rich or travel across the world. Hence, we were able to observe how our in-service teachers were not just thinking about learning vocabulary, grammar, and activities to develop this, but they were also reflecting and bringing into action how they were connecting with the rest of global cultures through our local culture and through our own identities, and actually get them to think, why in the world are they learning English? So what's interculturality in the Colombian or Latin American context, Carlos?
Yes, thank you, Tatiana. Yeah, so could you please share that screen for me, please? Thank you.
There you go.
Okay. Very good. So as Tatiana mentioned, so I have to tell you that I have changed the way in which I have approached interculturality, depending on my experiences. I used to live in England when I was doing my PhD there. And then there was another conception, well, what I got in terms of interculturality, maybe depending on the context where I was. But once I returned home, I returned to Colombia, I started to think, yes, the validity of the concept depending on our context. Yes, considering that, that our reality, it is quite different. So basically what Tatiana and me are going to share with you is, well, all these reflections concerning these nations. So the first one, as Tatiana will make this general description of our reality in Colombia, which is a beautiful country, I have to tell you that, beautiful people, but it's evident the social and economical inequalities we experience. Now the question that we have to pose now has to do with our understandings of interculturality in the field of ELT. As you are seeing in this slide, Fantini has defined intercultural competence as the ability to deal with difference and divergency in a positive manner. This definition is quite cited in many books, in many articles, yes, in Colombia and even in Latin America. But of course, we started to discuss about that we do not like at all, yes, this definition, because of we cannot see intercultural competence as an ability. You really know well what it means to develop an ability. We think it's much more than an ability. And also there is another point, is that with this regard, well, we do not agree at all, yes, on this definition, is the way in which, well, the author says that it's the ability to deal with divergence in a positive manner. Who says what it's going to be the positive manner? Who says what it's going to be the right way to deal with difference? So this is, well, one of the difficulties we can see in this definition. Next. But can we deal with differences in a positive manner in a society that it is surrounded by racism, capitalism, chauvinism? Next. Or can we talk about interculturality when our voices cannot be heard? So you can see everywhere in Latin America, we experience this, graffitis everywhere. So that's the only way in which, well, you see people can manifest, can express their opinions, their ways of living. So this is, well, something that I have seen even in most of the countries in Latin America. Next one. And also, can we talk about interculturality when we can see that there are women, many women in Latin America that are mistreated, lots of, yes, crimes against women. Next. Or if we can talk about interculturality and then we are not aware of the importance of empower the collective groups, so they are not considered. This picture was taken when in the frame of my postdoctoral study with Claxo and Flaxo, I went to Sao Paulo, and then we were analyzing the situation of many migrants who went to Sao Paulo, Syrians, but of course they were invisible there. So they were not receiving any support, yeah, from the system. So they were refugee, but they were completely abandoned, yes. Fortunately, well, with this community of people, so we were just working with them, trying to get them, yes, much more accepted, yes, in the society. Next, please. And this is me. Well, it is not necessary to go, yes, to different places in Latin America. This is me in the south of the city, in Ciudad Bolívar, in Bogotá. So talking and working with children. So they were asking for better education. So to work with them, it's quite amazing. They are very happy people. So they want to become, yes, very good, yes, human beings. But of course, they are not receiving anything by means of the government. So it is clear, yes, it is clear that socioeconomic, cultural, and political aspects of injustice are almost the same in Latin America. We all experience global forms of inequalities. Yeah, next, Tatiana. So according to that, so if we talk about inequalities, social, political, or economical, then is it possible to treat everyone in the same way? That's going to be the question, what I would like to share with you. We can talk about interculturality, but of course, can we talk about that in a context where you can see inequalities everywhere, in every dimension, not only on education, on social, political, and economical. Interculturality, unfortunately, in our context, it is a rhetorical word. It is a word used for some politicians. Sorry to say this, but that's true. It's a word used for some politicians to sound more democratic, inclusive, and sometimes comprehensive. Then what sort of interculturality are we talking about? Basically, that's the way in which we name our lecture today. So in the next, please. Intercultural proposal means to live and experience equality, respect towards difference, encourage dialogue. But what we have seen is that the intercultural bilingual programs in Latin America, or even in Europe, maybe in the United States, doesn't take into account the minority social cultural groups. See about our famous bilingual program in Colombia, or all these intercultural bilingual programs in Latin America. So what it is, the question is, what is the geopolitical context in which we are in Latin America? The discourse of interculturality is becoming a political and social issue in many Latin American countries. This discussion has contributed to homogenization models of modernization, which have ignored the cultural differences and go beyond to include the rights of each group. Today, we see how several constitutions were amended to embrace more, well, I wouldn't say multicultural, pluricultural countries, like in Colombia and also Brazil. Sorry, because of the dates here are not right. Brazil, so the new constitution, so it was in 1988, Mexico in 1992, Colombia in 1991, and Ecuador in 2008. And also Ecuador has experienced some changes of this constitution in 2011, 2014, and 2018, just in the sense of analyzing, yes, the richness of our societies, our communities, which are much more pluricultural. Next. What we can see specifically in Colombia is that our policies are designed to protect our pluricultural context. Once we read our constitution, we are proud of that. So we say, well, it is well written, so they consider and they protect, yes, these communities that are not considering, yes, in all the dimensions in this society. In fact, they are explicit on the idea, the constitution, our constitution particularly, they are explicit on the idea to protect the indigenous communities. As an example of this, we have the law 1381 declared in 2010 from the Ministry of Culture that states in some other articles the following. As you can see in Spanish, of course, this Article 1 defined the importance to recognize, protect, and develop the linguistic rights from the individuals and collectives from the different ethnic groups. It also promotes the preservation of their mother tongues. And in the Article 2, which is oriented to strengthen and protect the native languages due to they are part of the unmaterial heritage or intangible heritage, patrimonios inmateriales. Colombia is recognized as multi-ethnic and pluricultural state. In that sense, we need to preserve this heritage by means of creating and carried out special programs. This is what the article says, yes, by means of creating these programs. Unfortunately, those programs in our context are based on these bilingual programs or these aulas inclusivas, yes, that we have experienced in the Ministry of our Education. Next, please. On the other hand, the Ministry of Education has created a policy of inclusive education, which is intended to include and involve children and young people with disabilities throughout the educational cycle, from initial education to higher levels, secondary. Inclusion aims to allow them to develop their life skills at all levels, reach the standards, and get good outcomes with appropriate help. This is something, well, that we are doing just to get them to get ready and prepare to pass exams, maybe to become competitive, yes, to develop some standards, national standards. But this policy of inclusion has not been defined properly from my perspective, due to it has been restricted to a group of students with special needs, such as those with physical or mental disabilities, or sometimes, well, to refer to refugee children. Approaches and responses have been essentially compensatory or corrective, mainly through the establishment of curricular structures or programs for special groups. This is the case of the well-known bilingual program or the inclusive educational law system. A good example of this is the famous, that in Spanish we have heard, aulas inclusivas, where we get specific rooms in an institution to work and assist these special groups, having in mind that even these teachers, they don't know how to teach to these special groups. With this, we create and reinforce much more exclusion than inclusion. Next. So there are some definitions, yes, of interculturality. Interculturality has been defined in different ways. As you see in this slide, for instance, interculturality as a strategy to resolve the conflict, as a strategy to treat the divergence, diversity, and discrimination, as Tatiana mentioned, whether ethnic, religious, political, or cultural. Also, by means of what Clini says, interculturality, well, should be viewed in Latin America as a result of this migration process is that most of our countries in Latin America are experiencing nowadays. And particularly in Colombia, for instance, well, we have this definition much more related to the establishment of inequities of our educational policy. This is my perspective, yeah, because of it is only restricted to a specific group of people. And yes, that people, yes, that are considering are not the minority groups. Of course, they are just the ones, as I said before, yes, the one who shows some discapacities or, well, something like mental disorders or something like that. So they should receive a special treatment. This is the way, yes, in which our government thinks, yes, they are making real contribution to this population. Next, please. To understand interculturality in Colombia, so we need to place this phenomenon under Latin American perspective. We have representatives like you have seen and read, Boaventura de Souza, he's a Brazilian sociologist, Aníbal Quijano, a Peruvian sociologist, Maria Lugones, Argentinian philosopher and feminist, and Walter Vignola, he is a semiologist from Argentina, among others. These are some of Latin American scholars, yes, that we can refer, yes, to see this new perspective in which we have to analyze, yes, this phenomenon of interculturality. For instance, in the case of Quijano, get back, please. Quijano connects class and race issues. Maria Lugones, so she's interested in see those connections, yes, between gender and yes, these theories of racism. And Mignola tried altogether race, class, and gender. This is well to say some some of the contributions, well, what these Latin American scholars has already done. Yeah, next. So then what is our proposal? So our interest consists of integrating the post-colonial theories. Please do not confuse that. Yes, one thing is the post-colonial theories, what's going on after the colonial times. Yes, but we need to view, we need to approach, yes, those new ways and the different perspectives. So one of the things what many scholars in Latin America are proposing now is that we should analyze these theories under the colonial perspectives into the social sciences. This is also well what we want to propose. Of course, we have to confess we are not sociologists, we are not philosophers, we are English teachers, but we are trying to do our best in terms of trying to understand, yes, that ELT should be viewed in different ways, yes? So we need to study a little bit more, yes, about these new theories given by social science. Okay, next, please. And coming back to the point, to the definition of interculturality, and if interculturality means equalitarian relationships, it would be easy to understand the balance of power between knowledge, being, and having of both cultures. But generally, that doesn't take place because of the frictions of the different sources of exercising the power of culture in terms of the knowing, the being, and the having. In terms of the knowing, yes, as you can see in the slide, knowledge producing countries and cultures with greater power is imposed on others with lower power through standards and models of knowledge in science and technology. We are victims, sorry to say that, but this is, well, to be honest, we are the result of this. Look at, yes, and how our Ministry of Science, yes, asked, yes, certain parameters in which we have to do research. Think about also the bilingual programs, all the exercises, well, what we are doing in our teaching classrooms. So we are just standardizing all the processes, yes, all the learning processes in our classrooms. So this is an imposition of this dimension of the knowing. So countries and dependent cultures are limited to reproducing such knowledge. This is what we call the epistemic colonialism. So our suggestion is to approach this differently. How can we approach that? Is by means of considering this new perspective of the coloniality of knowledge. In the dimension of being, we know that ontological denial occurs when a native culture is not recognized. Yeah, area of non-being, for instance, like native cultures, do not think, do not know, and therefore do not exist, refuses its essence. Thoughts, knowledge, and practices are undervalued. This is what we call the ontological colonialism. So our suggestion is to work on the colonial of being. Yeah. And the next dimension that has to do, well, with the having, that it's much more related to the economic power, uses instruments of domination, increasingly more powerful and with more peaceful method, such as control of the monetary value of business expansion. This is called economical and political colonialism. So the suggestion is to decolonize, yes, this power. These are the sources of power of culture. Believe me, so we have lots of things to do in Latin America. So next, please. So my invitation or something, well, what also I have experienced is that we need to change a little bit the way how we approach interculturality in Latin America. So the way in which it is perceived and conceived and approached in Europe is totally different from Latin America. In Europe, it is a speech-oriented, directed towards society, encouraging tolerance of other cultures who experience the phenomenon of immigration. While in Latin America, it is oriented towards education through programs of bilingual education and or intercultural bilingual education that receive external support in order to assimilate them in a systematic way. So this is to be part of the Western language culture without causing traumatic experiences. This is what we live. So all what we do in Latin America, sorry to generalize, but when teaching languages, so we are all experiencing, yes, this intercultural bilingual education. Of course, there are some examples, beautiful examples, in which in Bolivia, Peru, yeah, in Chile, so we can see that they are just much more concerned towards the protection of indigenous community. But unfortunately, in our context, more particularly in Colombia, so we are just interested in promoting that idea of learning English as the only language, yes, for the students in some of the regions, as Tatiana mentioned. So in which, well, to be honest, English is not helpful, yeah, for any circumstance for those students. Next. So we have to check, yes, what it's going to be then the real sense of interculturality in Latin America. So when we talk about the nonsense of interculturality, intercultural discourses make up with rhetorical strategies the political, economic, and social discrimination. In this sense, true intentions are hidden. So we have to be conscious that it's in the dialogue between cultures where frictions occur, because this is what happens in an intercultural encounter. Frictions should occur and unpredicted behaviors emerge. As long as we are not competent to deal with difference and diversity, what we do? Homogenize and standardize everything and everyone. This is the idea, yes, that promotes the cultural homogenization. If human beings lose their personal and cultural identity, they also lose their being, essence, and relevance. So that's what it is very urgent. Yes, we need to change this paradigm or the situation what we are living in terms of developing interculturality, particularly in our context, in our policies. Next. So continue with the next one, please, because of time. So interculturality as discourse has been used by dominant groups as a mechanism to assimilate the minority cultures. We cannot speak of multiculturalism or, well, pluriculturalism while relationships of domination persist. Sorry to say, I wouldn't like to sound pessimistic, but this is the reality. I always say, I prefer to be realistic, yes, instead of being, yes, romantic and maybe thinking that interculturality, as Fantini mentioned, yes, is an ability to deal with difference and divergence in a positive manner. I think it's something totally different from for Latin America, where we experience, as I've been telling you, all these inequalities. Next, please. So interculturality as discourse is used by the dominant group as a means to oppress the minority groups. As long as relations of domination persist, interculturality is unfeasible, to be honest. This is what Zárate and also Quijano has mentioned, yes, also in their articles. Language is used as a tool of domination, that it's built as an object of desire. This is what Walter Mignolo says, and as an artifact to colonize, conquest, and dominate local epistemologies. Well, we are really aware, yes, what is going on in our teaching classrooms, yes, when we are imposing, yes, this language. Next. So the idea is that we should be wise to avoid language, yes, that excludes, dispersonalizes, stigmatizes, reinforces stereotypes, and legitimates, yes, discrimination. So this is something what Thompson suggests, yes, that we should do with language, yes, because I think that we have the most powerful tool, the language. Also, we can decolonialize and also we can colonialize, yes, by means of using the language. So that's what we have to be very careful in the way how we use the language. Kumaradivelu, next one, argues that to decolonize CLT, it is essential to reshape ways of planning, knowing, and proceeding as teachers to allow student teachers to become not just consumers of pedagogical knowledge, but producers of a new set of epistemic system. This is something that we've been doing, yes, in Colombia, just to position day by day, more what we do, more what we can produce. I think that we are just fed up of consuming, yes, all these years, hundreds of years, yes. We are very good at consuming all this Western knowledge, everything is given by the others. But what about what we do and how what we do those things, yes? So it is necessary to position our own epistemologies. Next. So the concept of interculturality is and has been used as means of cultural homogenization. Next. So the state, the NGOs and international agencies make up with interculturality their dominant and globalized speech. They also finance social and bilingual programs. This is very common, of course. If you don't need to be linguist just to analyze the speeches of many politicians, of many people who are making policies in our countries, and just to see the way in which they use, yes, the concept of interculturality, just to see, well, what they want to mean. Next. So it is very naive to think in cultural equality and mutual respect of culture in an equitable manner. Interculturality is desirable but little real utopia. This is, well, the way I say, it's not to be pessimistic, but this is an utopia, considering all the inequities, considering, yes, all the injustices, yes, what we can see, yes, whether they are social, political, economical, educational, and well, so on. Next. Very quickly, please, next, Tatiana. The next, well, this is very important. This is, sorry, get back, please. Today, the mechanisms of domination change, update, and adapt to each type of society and culture. New strategies to control power are planned, as Van Dijk, yes, pointed out. Speech and minds of people are controlled across these three professions. Look, because we are included there. We teachers, journalists, politicians, and teachers, yes? So we have our responsibility in the way, yes, of defining and viewing, yes, interculturality. So be careful, yes, on what we do, because of it's part of our responsibility. Next. Fraser, I really like, yes, Nancy Fraser. She is the American philosopher. She has written lots of things, yes, about injustice and how gender is related to injustice. And then she has proposed, yes, an approach in which she distinguished three aspects of inequality: socioeconomic, cultural, as well as political. And 6 forms, because of also she proposes some remedy of ways to overcome the aspects of inequality mentioned for each aspect in an affirmative and transformative way. Next slide, I'm going to explain this. So, of course, this is the way how she interprets this, but of course, well, it's up to us maybe to see what it's going to be, well, one of the ways to look for the remedy. There are 2 ways, by means of looking for this remedy, affirmative or transformative. Affirmative, it deals much more, well, with the idea to recognize what are going to be the ways in which, well, we can be much more inclusive, or the ways in which we can give opportunities only by means of recognizing or being aware of them. But transformative is to execute, is to put in action, yes, those things. I'm going to give you an example. One thing is, for instance, in our modern companies, in huge companies, of course, sometimes they say, we want to be much more inclusive, well, then we are going to hire more women, and by means of hiring more women, so now they are saying that they are just working on gender issues. But that's not the point. The point is not to hire more women to sound, yes, that you are now much more inclusive. This is a liberal welfare state. This is a mainstream multiculturalism, and the political reason or consequence is going to be separation. So the idea, what she proposed, Nancy Fraser, is maybe to adopt something new. Well, this is another perspective, which is if we want to transform something, then we can get, yes, in this socioeconomic dimension, then, well, socialism is a very good example of that. Yes, the construction is a very good example, yes, of understanding and recognizing the cultural dimension, and supplementation, transgression of the nation-state frame is a very good example of this political representation. I suggest you to have a look at, yes, her articles, yes, and remember Nancy Fraser. So she's quite good. She's a philosopher, social and political philosopher, yes, analyzing the situation of these actions, affirmative and transformative. I think, Tatiana, I'm going to leave it here now, but basically with Tatiana, well, what we want to share with you is this way in which interculturality, yes, could be viewed. So the idea is just to promote, as Sarate also highlights, is to work much more on pluriculturalism, yes, the importance of working in pluriculturalism. Diversity becomes the greatest wealth of the human condition, and to recognize this condition is the starting point for a peaceful coexistence and harmonious relationship between different cultures existing in the world. Many thanks. So I think that we have time. So there are references at the end of this presentation. Also, well, we can share the presentation with you guys. Well, if you want, the final insights, Tatiana, if you want to mention some of them, please.
Do we have time, Mario? Is that okay?
We have a couple of minutes.
Okay, great. So some insights, final insights. Interculturality requires us teachers and students to decenter ourselves. And although this can be achieved, teachers do not formally assess themselves or their students as intercultural agents. Well, basically, we see it from like the teaching perspective, the educational perspective, but this could also be seen from a political perspective. It's not just teachers and students who need to decenter themselves and think about it, become aware of it, but also politicians or policymakers should work on this. Interculturality requires teachers to be aware of what is taught and how it is taught and how ICC can be assessed, all right? We tend to maybe concentrate in teaching knowledge, skills, and language proficiency. However, it is not only what is taught, but also how it is taught, how it is being taught, and with what sense do we teach it. The same works for policymakers or politicians. It's not just what the policy is, but then how it's going to be implemented. Do we teach English to teach students this is the way you can run away from your country to have a better life? Or do we teach English to have them look at themselves from another perspective and broaden their perspective about people, the world, and especially themselves? So all the savoirs are important as well. There's none of them that prevail over the other one. When teaching English, it is not just about grading the linguistic aspects, but language users must be assessed as cultural users of the language. Carlos, yes, you want to wrap it up?
Yes, Tatiana, it's something, yes, that I would like to highlight and has to do with the pedagogical practices. As I mentioned, it is necessary to position, yes, what we do, yes, in our own ways of constructing knowledge. I think the only ones who can explain what's going on in our country, in Latin America, is us, teachers, yes, from the daily life. So it is necessary to empower teachers, maybe to be responsible for the ways of understanding these pedagogical practices. The other one has to do, well, with the idea to make much more research in terms of interculturality. So more than saying that we need urgent training programs, so what we should do is just maybe to prepare teachers, maybe to see and approach, yes, interculturality from different perspectives, yeah. And the last one could be, yes, that interculturality, more than saying that intercultural communicative competence is a significant tool to construct, yes, and to understand cultures, yes, of peace and reconciliation. And as we mentioned before, we have a huge responsibility because we are working with one of the most important tools, language, the language. With language, we can make this possible. Or maybe we can create a chaos. So I think that we should be very careful, yes, in the way, yeah, how we use language and how we teach languages, yes. Basically, this is what I want to mention in these final insights. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And here we have final references. Well, not here. Okay, wait. No, wrong presentation, sorry. Give me a second.
Well, but we can share that, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so the bibliography and the references, everything. Yeah, thank you.
Just the
All
change.
right, thank you. Thank you very much, Tatiana and Carlos, for such a wonderful presentation about the actual meanings of intercultural education in our country and in Latin America. So I think we have time for one or two questions. So if anybody wants to ask a question to Carlos and Tatiana, you can please go ahead. You can raise your hand. Or you can use the chat box as well. You can use a microphone or the chat. So it looks like we have a question here on the chat. I'm going to go ahead and read it, all right? I like the honest gaze you have taken in your talk. I think the first step to actually decolonize our policies is having an honest portrayal of where we are and who we are.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we all agree, well, with Adriana. With that, we first need to decolonize, yes, our practices. Yes, honestly, well, that's what we should do. Sometimes, well, Adriana, this is actually, well, sometimes, well, when I see in retrospection and me, yes, 20 years ago, when I started to teach languages, then what was the emphasis? How I teach cultural aspects, how I, yes, get my students involved in many things. So I started to change my practices, yes. And then I found that it was necessary to study more because of this is well what we need, because of, well, we want to improve, we want to make the change, yeah, but sometimes we don't know how to do it. So it is necessary, well, to read and to work, but most importantly is to work into collaboration, to create communities, yes, in which, well, we are interested in viewing, in approaching, yes, the things in a different way. So basically, and now I am much more concerned of the importance of promoting this idea of communities of practice. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much. We have some more opinions in the chat. I don't know if maybe I can read a couple of them. Let's see, it reads here from William. South to South dialogue has been promoted in Colombia through the Select China Forum and aims to address the aspects of inequality that you have mentioned. How do you see the Chinese strategy of what is called the community of shared future of mankind contributing to this discussion?
Wow, such an interesting question. So that's what I would like just to start a research project, yes, in which we are going to see, yes, the future of this mankind contribution, yes, for the discussion. So we can get in touch, yes, William, yeah, just to see, because of, I think I've been in China, and to be honest, well, different communities, but in a certain way, we share lots of things in terms of traditions, yes, which is quite good. So I think, yes, we can start, yes, research, why not, yes, in terms of seeing, analyzing, comparing, and working together, yes, for the same thing, yes, improving this idea of interculturality in our countries.
Good, and I would like to read one more comment, and then we can move on to the picture, because we always take a picture, you know. So at some point, I'm going to ask you to please turn on your camera so you can use your best smile to be on the picture, all right? But let me just go ahead and read this final comment from Prue Holmes. It reads here, thank you, Adriana, for that important point. Yes, it does seem obvious, but do we do it? Or are we caught up with fashion and what we think is right based on what our peers do? Very interesting insight, right? So again, thank you very much, Carlos and Tatiana. And of course, thanks to everybody here. Thank you for your questions. Now it's picture time. So if you want to be in the picture, could you please go ahead and turn on your cameras and then smile to the camera so we can take the picture, all right? Okay. See, thank you, thank you. More and more people joining the picture. Great. All right, good. So you can smile now. 1, 2, 3. Let me go ahead and take one more just in case. 1, 2, 3. Say cheese. All right. Thank you very much, guys, for such a wonderful presentation again, and for the entire day of presentations. We truly had a really good time, and we expect you to for the third day of our. Thank you.
Thanks to you. Okay, have a good day.
Everyone.
Well, rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Nice to see you, Anne-Marie.
Yes.
To Tatiana and Carlos. Really nice.
A big kiss.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Congratulations. It was wonderful.
All right. Thank you, Manuela.